Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. And today I have no co-host, but instead four brilliant guests. Later in the show, I'll speak to economist Jonathan Portes about the UK-India trade deal and whether the right are correct to say that Keir Starmer has sold British workers down the river. After that, I have an interview with the former Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir David King, very distinguished fellow, on the government announcing a number of experimental geoengineering projects. I end the show with Jeanine Hourani from the Palestine Youth Movement about a new report they've done with others into the UK government sending arms to Israel. India has attacked Pakistan overnight, launching a barrage of missiles into Pakistan's Punjab region, as well as Pakistan-administered Kashmir. This is the moment one of those missiles struck Pakistan-controlled territory. Called Operation Sindoor, the Indian attack struck 9 sites across the region. Missiles hit locations inside Pakistan, along India's border, as well as along the line of control in Kashmir. And now that's the border that separates the part of Kashmir administered by India from the part controlled by Pakistan. According to Pakistani officials, civilian sites were targeted in the attack. That's a claim India denies. One mosque in Bahawalpur, Pakistan, was destroyed in the barrage, with India claiming it belonged to the founder of an Islamist group. A second mosque was also destroyed, in which 2 3-year-old girls are reported to have been killed. In total, at least 25 missiles rained down on the region, resulting in massive blasts, loud explosions, and large areas engulfed in flames. At least 26 people have been reported killed in the attack, several of them children. A further 46 people were injured. In response, Pakistan has declared India's attack an act of war and is reported to have retaliated. There have been reports of cross-border fire from Pakistan into India-controlled Kashmir, with these houses alleged to have been hit in a Pakistani strike. India says that at least 8 people have been killed in cross-border fire in India-controlled territory, with a further 40 injured. Pakistan also claims to have downed 3 Indian fighter jets over India-controlled Kashmir, and with debris found near the line of control. India, however, says they crashed. Pakistan has vowed a full retaliation for the Indian strikes, with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif saying this: and Pakistan has every right to respond forcefully to this act of war imposed by India, and a forceful response is being given. The Pakistani nation and the Pakistan Armed Forces know very well how to deal with the enemy. We will never let the enemy succeed in its nefarious objectives. Now, the context for these strikes is a terror attack that took place last month. So it was at a beauty spot near the town of Pahalgam in India-controlled Kashmir, and 26 Indian tourists were killed when gunmen dressed in military uniform opened fire on the holidaymakers. A further 20 people were injured in the attack. Now, following that massacre, India accused Pakistan of harbouring and aiding the gunmen involved in the killings, a claim that Pakistan has denied. That framing continued on the Today programme this morning, when former spokesperson of India's ruling BJP party, Shaina Nana Chudasama, gave this account of the overnight missile strikes.
Please understand that every target by India in Operation Sindoor is not just a befitting answer for the Pahalgam terror attacks, but it is to finish off the terror activities which Pakistan has completely insulated.
But what Pakistan says is 2 things. Number one, that they themselves fight terrorism and have lost a lot of people in that fight. And number 2, that there is no evidence linking the Pakistani state at all to the attacks last month in Kashmir.
First, let me please say that Operation Sindoor is targeted to terrorists, terror outfits, and terror organizations that have chosen to be insulated by certain segments of Pakistan, which is known to Pakistan. So this is not targeted to the civilians in Pakistan. We have said earlier too that we have faith in the Indian government and that no Pakistani civilians have been harmed. And we will continuously tell the Pakistan government and its leaders that what you are doing by insulating the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Toiba is incorrect. The international world community stands with us. The Prime Minister has the goodwill of not just the United Nations, whether it is President Putin or you speak to any of the world leaders, they will tell you the same thing, that New Bharat will not spare anyone who tries to play around with perpetrators of crime.
On Sky, chairman of the Pakistan People's Party, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, challenged that narrative.
India has manufactured a lie of a baseless accusation against Pakistan. If there was any truth to this lie, why did they not agree to Pakistan's offer for an impartial investigation? Why did they not wait for the international journalists who were already visiting these alleged sites to come up with their response? The truth is that India has manufactured this lie to target Indian civilians. It is not 2001. It is not 2003. Not all Muslims are terrorists, and the world is sick and tired of the way in which this accusation is bandied about to justify aggressive actions, to justify illegal actions, to justify imperialistic actions. And Pakistan, for one, will not kneel to such pressure.
The fear in the international community is that the exchange of fire between India and Pakistan could spiral out of control. Both sides are, after all, nuclear powers. And in India, nationwide drills have begun in case of a Pakistani counteroffensive, with children and workers being told to prepare for the worst eventuality. I'm joined now by journalist Waqas Ahmed of Dropsite News. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, how should we understand these attacks? India wants us to see them as a counter-terror operation, basically, and Pakistan framing them as an act of war. Which is it?
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. If we want to understand it, it's about the calculation that we have between India and Pakistan and how they've been dealing with each other for the past 70 years. So Pakistan and India came up with a strategy because Kashmir has been an issue since both countries got independence, and it was an unresolved issue. And this unresolved issue, since international law is useless and has been useless for the longest time, well, nobody in the international community really took any concrete steps to solve this issue. So because of that, this whole area has been simmering. And what both countries came up with while maintaining this Cold War is a strategy of using proxies against each other. So Pakistan has been using proxies in Kashmir for the longest time. India has been using proxies in Pakistani Balochistan area for the longest time. Both of these proxies met different attacks in both of these countries. India, being the bigger country, in early 2000s came up with a strategy that if there is a Pakistani proxy that does something in India, India should escalate it, because since India has overall superiority, India will be able to escalate it on its own terms, putting a cost on Pakistan. So suppose a terrorist attack happens in Kashmir, 10 people die. Immediately afterwards, India will start something that will increase the cost for the Pakistani military, giving them an incentive not just of stopping the support of these groups, but also giving them an incentive to actively try to stop these groups. And since India has that superiority in terms of numbers and strength, India can put that cost on Pakistan, and Pakistan will be unable to put a similar cost on India. So this is the calculation we've been seeing for the past 3-4 cycles of this. So in 2019, there was a major attack in India, and let's actually go back a bit. In early 2000, like in 2003, I'm forgetting right now, I think it was 2003, there was a major terrorist attack on the Indian parliament. After that terrorist attack, that's when India first came up with the strategy of putting the cost on Pakistan. So India mobilized their whole military. When India mobilized this is like a huge army. The whole mobilization took more than a month. During the mobilization, thousands of Indian soldiers died, unfortunately. And India realized that they cannot mobilize their whole forces because India is huge. Mobilizing them has serious costs, significant costs associated with India. So they cannot, at every terrorist attack, like you could spend like $100,000 on committing like one terrorist attack, and then India would have to spend billion to mobilize its army. The costs are not fair. So India came up with a strategy that if there's going to be any attack in India, India will respond with some kind of surgical targeted strikes using jets and bombed specific areas. India did that in 2019. In 2019, this whole calculation came into effect. There was an attack in Kashmir. India bombed certain places in Pakistan. And then, as a retaliation, Pakistan conducted an operation in which 2 Indian jets were shot down. So this is the context of what happened a few weeks from now. There was another attack in India, and similarly, according to Indian calculation, according to Indian calculus, they had to put a cost on India. And to put that cost on, there was a lot of international pressure on India. The Americans didn't want India to escalate this hugely because Pakistan is also an American ally. So there was considerable pressure on India to show restraint. India, in some terms, if we do consider their own internal calculus, has shown restraint in the sense that they did not cross over into Pakistani territory. They did not target Pakistani military targets. They did not destroy any Pakistani military buildings. They didn't. They even avoided areas with large civilian presence. They targeted a few buildings that were far away from cities, like not really in the middle of cities, far away from the cities, and they targeted some most buildings that they targeted were empty. But still, they did attack Pakistan across the border, and Pakistan, according to Pakistani calculation, then Pakistan now has to escalate this. In the night, while India was doing this, during the same time, Pakistan was able to shot down. I have personal confirmation that two. CNN also citing French intelligence reporting, like one Rafale jet has been shot down, which is French made. So they were able to give that confirmation. And there's at least one Russian jet shot down. Pakistani military says 6 jets have been shot down, but we're not sure yet. There is a probability that at least 4 have been shot down because we have seen 4 separate videos from 4 different cities in India where aircraft debris has been found.
And so, I mean, I suppose I understand the narrative, sort of this tit for tat and how we've got to where we are. Sort of listening to it in that, it's almost difficult to work out what's the point. What's the point in this tit for tat? Is there a sort of, how are each side benefiting from, I suppose, this sort of escalation of tensions, which, I mean, from your description, doesn't sound too out of control. It sounds like they're trying to keep this sort of relatively low level, neither of them looking for all-out war. But what are we seeing happen here? What's the game plan on either side, I suppose?
The game plan is the same that has been in play, putting costs on each other, trying to nudge each other towards some kind of compliance. But the dangerous situation is, while this is very calculated, the danger is that it can really spiral out of control. Because there are internal political issues inside Pakistan and India that both push their governments towards taking a more hawkish approach towards each other. So for Modi, if had he not done these attacks on buildings and etc. last night, he would have faced a significant political backlash. He could have lost the next election. He's already losing some control over Indian politics. So this could have been really disastrous for him. So he had to act. Now, on the other side, the Pakistani military controls the Pakistani politics. Pakistani military has been in control of the government for the past 3 years at least, and they're highly unpopular. If they do not respond to India, then they will become even more popular. And the control that they have, they will lose because internally the military will start pressuring the military leadership. So that they both operate under these constraint pressure from within their own constituents. So if suppose Pakistan now thinks that shooting down jets were not enough, because this is the narrative going on in Pakistan. There are two schools of thought in Pakistan currently. One says that Indians attacked Pakistani buildings last night inside Pakistani borders. So we must do the same thing to India, destroy some buildings inside India. The other says that since Indian jets tried to shoot down these buildings and we shot down 4 jets, so we're even and we should call it a day. Now, both have their own pros and cons, both have their own constituents in Pakistan. But suppose the side that says that we must retaliate in some other way, that wins in Pakistan, because Pakistani military chief is in a weak position, and he must feel that pressure to retaliate, to do something against India, especially considering the previous leader of Pakistan, Imran Khan, who is currently in jail, did retaliate against India. So if Asim Munir, the Pakistani current general, does not retaliate against India, he will look very bad. And if he does retaliate against India, he does something, suppose, and India thinks that was crossing a certain line, then India might uh, move its soldiers towards Pakistan. And if that something like that happen, if they suppose they take a few villages in Pakistan, move towards Pakistani cities, or escalate this more, Pakistan could use something that Pakistan has, and it's part of their military strategy. They have really small nuclear devices called tactical nukes that are meant to be used in the battlefield. So you have 10,000 soldiers coming towards your city, and you can't defend your city. You use this small battlefield nuke to destroy the oncoming army. But it is still a nuke. We don't know how India will react to such a nuke. Will they consider that as a nuclear attack on India? If they do, then there's like confirmed nuclear escalation here. So these things can go out of control really fast, even though we might intend them to be in our control.
So interesting. So often it's sort of the root of foreign policy conflicts is domestic politics in either country, which is what's driving the escalation more than any sort of like rational, realist self-interest of any sort of state taken as such. Obviously, these are two nuclear powers. Sort of when we talk about the USA and Russia, it's always like, oh, they couldn't possibly go directly into conflict. It's always going to have to be proxies because two nuclear powers can't directly go to war. How worried should we be that we've got two nuclear powers that seem to be in direct conflict?
We should be worried. Like I said, there are 3 steps towards a tactical nukes, and then after that, nobody knows what could happen. So we should be very worried about that. And I think international community is worried. I think there is pressure on India as well as on Pakistan to de-escalate it. So if you consider J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance's statement 4 days ago, he said that they are in contact with both Pakistan and India, and they have been telling India to not escalate it beyond a certain point. And if they respond to the terrorist attack, their escalation should be measured and calculated so that it does not go beyond control. He said something like that. You can check his statement online. And also, if you watch all of the statements coming from US officials, they have not said what India wanted them to say. So India wants international community to directly say to Pakistan that you are supporting terrorism and you should stop and put sanctions on Pakistan or put some kind of control over Pakistan. And if you notice, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, Secretary Rubio, all of them have not named Pakistan. They haven't said anything about Pakistan. And that to me is really interesting. We have some indications for the past 3 years at least. Pakistani military has been supported by the State Department and by the CIA. And they have been working very closely in Pakistan to ensure that the military stays in power and Pakistan's jailed former prime minister stays in jail. All of this is a part of the regional plan to keep Pakistan away from the Chinese camp and into American camp. So as long as Pakistan keeps walking this tightrope, keeps leaning mostly towards West, the US will keep on supporting Pakistan at some level. And the pressure on India to keep their response calculated is a part of that partnership with America. But America's overall strategy in the region is around China, and America's engagement with India is also around China. America, for the past 2-3 years, has not been very happy with India. First of all, because of the whole Russia thing, India kept importing Russian oil despite America wanting them not to. Then Indian Foreign Minister Jaishankar keeps on saying these anti-Western, anti-colonial things all over the place. India keeps on trying to have an independent foreign policy. India keeps on not confronting China like America wants it to do. So there has to be a counterbalance in the region, which is Pakistan. America wants Pakistan to be on American side, to basically be a counterweight to India, and both of them work together to give a tough time to China. And this is what it's all about. It's China and America. All of the roads will eventually lead to that.
So interesting. Waqas Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us and talking us through that. Really, really fascinating stuff.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lots more stories to get through today. We'll definitely be coming back to this story over the next few days. I have to admit, I don't know enough about India and Pakistan. This is something I'm going to have to be learning a lot about over the coming days and weeks, I think. Super, super interesting. The Labour government had hoped that after a disastrous set of local elections, signing a trade deal with India could reset the national mood. But if they had expected any praise from Britain's press, well, these headlines would have left them sorely disappointed. The Daily Mail boomed that Labour had created a tax break for Indian workers, making it cheaper to employ foreign staff. The Times reported there was anger at an Indian payoff, which they said would undercut UK workers. And the Daily Telegraph has redeployed its favourite moniker for Starmer, calling him two-tier Kia for the deal he's signed with India. So what's all the fuss about? Well, this is the passage in the government summary of the trade deal that has caused so much consternation. So it says that the Double Contributions Convention, or DCC, so it says, alongside the Free Trade Agreement, the UK and India have agreed to negotiate a reciprocal Double Contributions Convention. The DCC will support business and trade by ensuring that employees moving between the UK and India and their employers will only be liable to pay social security contributions in one country at a time. The DCC will also ensure that employees temporarily working in the other country for up to 3 years will continue paying social security contributions in their home country, preventing the fragmentation of their social security record. Might sound a little bit wonkish. This is how Nigel Farage, though, wanted us to interpret that passage.
A company can transfer workers from India to the UK. Those workers here will not pay any national insurance for at least 3 years. Remember what happened at the budget? Employers' national insurance went up by 2% for each worker, costing companies on average at least £1,000 a year per worker. And yet, companies that bring in Indian workers, the companies themselves will pay no national insurance either. It means overall, it's about 20% cheaper to employ an Indian after this deal than it is to employ a British worker.
So is Nigel Farage right? Well, this morning, Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds was unequivocal.
No, absolutely not. And I'm delighted to be able to clear this up unequivocally. So let's be clear. If you were an Indian national in the UK and you applied for a job and a British person applied for the same job, you pay exactly the same tax. This is a very specific situation that we already have for 50 other countries, where if you are an Indian national temporarily seconded to the UK or a UK national temporarily seconded to India, you don't pay both countries' tax systems. If you're a UK citizen, you pay into ours. If you're an Indian national, you pay into theirs. It just makes it easier to move people between companies for a short period of time. But we would never do any deal that undercuts British workers, that leads to any sort of two-tier tax system. I say again, we have this with 50 other countries, and I don't hear many complaints about that.
As someone not trained in the minutiae of trade deals, I wanted an expert to make sense of it all. So I spoke to Jonathan Portes, Professor of Economics at King's College London, and I asked him to explain the clause behind the two-tier row.
If you come and work here, you're subject to, for any length of time, you're subject to UK tax rules. That means you pay income tax, you pay national insurance contributions, and so on. Now, the problem is, though, and for most people, that's fine. The problem is, though, for some people who are coming here on explicitly on a temporary visa. So this isn't people who are coming to work, for normal skilled work visas, like, say, a nurse or someone working in a care home, but people who are transferred here by their own companies for a limited period of time, something called the intra-corporate transfer visa or the global mobility visa, as it's now known. Those people know they're going to be back. They end up paying into the social security system, the national insurance system here of the country they're in, but they're not going to get anything back. They're not going to be claiming a pension in the UK. And this happens a lot between lots of countries. So with quite a few countries, we have arrangements that enable people coming here on this visa not to pay into our system, but to carry on paying into their home system so they can continue building up their entitlement to their pension and other benefits at home because they know they'll be going back there. So we've got one with the US, we've got one with Chile, I think, and a few other countries. And we also have, very importantly, one with the EU, which essentially means that we can carry on doing what happened before Brexit. Again, if you're posted here by your company from a European country, you can carry on paying back into your system back home for a couple of years. And so there are a lot of Indians here on this visa, more than any other country. So for the Indians, this is quite a big deal for lots of Indians who move here temporarily and for the companies that employ them. And so it was a big ask for them. And from our point of view, this was never, we never objected to this on principle. We always knew that that we did it for other countries. So we didn't say to the Indians, this isn't fair, or we don't want to give it. But it did take a bit of negotiation because there are so many Indians here that it's actually, the Treasury was getting quite a bit of free money here. So unsurprisingly, we didn't want to give that away without lots of the other things that are in the trade deal, which we think will benefit us. So overall, in terms of the principle of it, there's absolutely no doubt that what the Indians were asking for and what we've given is entirely reasonable. It's ending a provision under which they were paying money for essentially nothing, whereas other people from other countries in similar positions weren't. But it will cost us something, and that's why we only gave it away in return for a bunch of other things that are in the trade deal that we think will benefit the UK economy.
So I suppose there's two claims being made, isn't there? There's the fairness claim, and I think you've made the point well that if these people aren't going to sort of receive benefits or pensions from the UK, then it doesn't make sense for them to be paying national insurance here. So I completely accept that point. The other point which is being made, though, is that from the perspective of an employer, it is advantageous to employ someone on this scheme because you don't have to pay employer-based national insurance. So is it not the case that while this might not be unfair from the perspective of the worker, the Indian worker who's come here on this visa, that from the perspective of the British worker, you are potentially being out-competed by someone because they're cheaper for an employer that won't have to pay their national insurance contributions?
Well, there's 2 points here. First of all, the Indian company will have to pay social security contributions, as will the employee. They'll just have to pay them to the Indian social security system, not to ours. Now, what that actually means in practice, I don't know how that stacks up in terms of numbers, but it's not that they get away without paying any social security contributions. They're paying them into the system. And the second, but most important point, this does not apply to a company here that hires a new worker and has to choose between an Indian, a Brit, and somebody from somewhere else. This applies to Indian companies who transfer their own employees from India to here for a specific period of time, usually to work on a specific project, generally in this case in the IT sector. And frankly, remember that the salary threshold for these employees is quite high, and also the company is having to pay relocation costs and in general accommodation costs as well. Usually when companies do these things, they transfer, they pay for the employee to be housed and so on, for all the usual reasons. So it's very, the idea that companies are choosing to do this primarily on cost grounds just doesn't really add up. For the most part, they're doing it because it's their business model, it's their workforce. These are people who are already working for these companies. The idea that they're going to hire a British worker instead, that's just not really how it works.
I suppose in general, so presumably the reason why you have Indian companies that want to bring over a temporary worker to the UK is because they're performing contracts for UK services or UK companies. And so one could make the argument that what we're doing here is giving Indian companies a competitive advantage when it comes to sort of competing for contracts with, I'm making this up off the top of my head, but the NHS or a large corporation. And why would a government be helping Indian firms do this? And I suppose especially in a situation where it does seem a bit weird, the sort of government strategy here, because just a month ago, you sort of had the Labour Party saying globalization's over. We're interested in sort of the national economy and securonomics. And now they're saying, great, we've got this free trade deal with India, which is potentially going to make it easier to outsource jobs to the Indian subcontinent from Britain. Why does this all make sense, sort of in sum, when you take it all together?
Well, okay, so looking at starting from the top down, saying globalization was over was a pretty stupid thing to say, frankly. It was perhaps a knee-jerk reaction to Trump, and a very foolish one, in my view. The right answer to Trump is not to say globalization is over, but to say, look, if the US insists on declaring a trade war on the rest of the world, that doesn't mean globalization is over, but it does mean that the UK will need to be rather more agile and nimble in how it pursues its model of globalization, including by doing deals with other countries and trading more with other countries, like indeed India. So it seems to me the India-UK free trade deal is a sensible response to the Trump challenge, whereas sort of saying, oh yes, Trump's right, globalization is over, is frankly, both from an economic and a political point of view, entirely the wrong response. It weakens us politically, it weakens us economically, and makes us poorer. So I'm glad to say, the government may say some stupid things, but it's actually doing the right thing here. That's the general point. On the specifics, yes, it's complicated. I mean, I think, frankly, and this, I think, underlies what's really going on here, is that the idea that if we didn't allow big Indian companies like TCS and Tata to compete for these contracts by basing the project here and staffing it, at least in part, with people on these temporary work visas, the most likely thing that would happen would be that those jobs would stay in India, that we do it all remotely, or the vast majority of it remotely, right? So when you're saying outsourcing jobs, we're not outsourcing, we're outsourcing the jobs, but we're outsourcing the jobs to West London to be done by, or wherever, to be done in large part by Indians who are here, being employed here, paying income tax here, remember, spending money here, and generating a whole host of other economic spin-offs here, as opposed to Indians in Bangalore. So, you can take your pick on that. If you think that that in the absence of that, if you banned both of those things, that somehow we would generate a domestic sector that was able to do that more expensively, well, it's possible. It's possible that if we banned Indian mangoes, we would start growing our own too. They probably wouldn't be as good and they'd be more expensive, and overall we'd be poorer, although there might be a few artisanal British mango farmers. That is indeed how globalization works. That's how free trade and comparative advantage work. We can indeed choose to have some more of this stuff here at the expense of being poorer and having fewer jobs in other things. But on the whole, we do pretty well out of our trade with India, and increasing our trade, including the letting Indians come here to deliver this stuff, is overall going to be net beneficial for the UK economy.
I get the argument you've put forward. It's very much an economist argument. That sort of, this is just the way the wind blows. This is sort of Tony Blair saying this is like debating gravity, debating globalization. Do you not feel that sort of the argument you've put forward is potentially out of step with the current political moment? Yes, your call center job, and like the trade unions, by the way, and people who work in call centers and who work in customer services, for example, they're always furious that their jobs are going to India or the Philippines. So to sort of say, oh well, that's globalization. That's how these things work. Do you not worry about how that's received?
I certainly worry about how it's received, but we can see. I mean, again, you can look to the US to see what a genuine political and economic strategy of reversing that looks like. And It's not pretty. It will hit the poorest people in America hardest because they'll end up paying more for goods and services. It might generate a few more jobs in some sectors in the US at the cost of quite a lot more jobs elsewhere. It will redistribute money towards oligarchs in the US away from lower and lower middle income people. So yeah, sure, you could do the same thing here. And we have parties that want to do that. But let's be quite clear that what the economic and social impacts of that will be. They will not be pretty, and they will not be ones that anybody who is vaguely on the centre or progressive left, or anyone who actually has the interests of the British people of lower and middle incomes ought to want.
The UK government has announced the first round of geoengineering experiments that they will be funding. Now, the experiments will include ways of blocking sunlight to slow global heating, and ARIA, which is the UK science funding agency, has set aside £56 million for the programme. The plan to fund geoengineering experiments has always been very controversial. Back in March, two leading climate scientists, Raymond Pierre Humbert and Michael Mann, warned the UK's gamble on solar geoengineering was like using aspirin for cancer. But the government is pressing ahead with the projects. And what has been announced this week is the specific trials that will be funded. So this is from The Guardian. The ARIA-funded experiments include sending a weather balloon into the stratosphere above the US or UK. Milligram samples of non-toxic mineral dust will be exposed to the high-altitude conditions and then recovered to assess how the particles' properties change with time. So I assume this is for stratospheric aerosol injection. It goes on. Another 3 experiments will test how seawater sprays or electrical charges delivered by drones can seed tiny water droplets, making clouds over the oceans reflect more sunlight. And they say one will expand current work over the Great Barrier Reef, which is in crisis because of global heating, and may reach 100 square kilometres in scale, while another will take place on the UK coast. A 5th experiment will involve pumping water onto sea ice in Canada in winter, reaching up to 1 kilometre square in scale. The water will freeze and preserve the ice sheet for longer in summer. Bright white ice reflects far more sunlight than the dark ocean revealed when sea ice is lost to warming waters. And the ARIA programme will also fund various modelling teams to investigate the impact of geoengineering on climate and ecosystems, especially in developing countries, to determine the feasibility of sunshades placed into orbit to reflect the sun. And there will be further teams working on the ethics and governance associated with geoengineering. Now, as I say, this is incredibly contentious among the scientific community. One very prominent scientist, though, who is welcoming the decision is Sir David King. David King was the chief scientific advisor to the UK government between the years 2000 and 2007. And from 2013 to 2017, he was special representative for climate change to the Foreign Secretary. David King has long been an outspoken advocate for tough climate action. In 2004, he made headlines with the claim that climate change was a bigger threat to the world than terrorism. And since leaving government, he has continued his climate advocacy, setting up the Climate Crisis Advisory Group and the Centre for Climate Repair at Cambridge University, where he's been an advocate for using marine cloud brightening to refreeze the Arctic. Now, my conversation with David covered many areas, including why he believes China has an excellent record on climate, contrary to many critics. But I began by asking what he made of the UK announcement about geoengineering.
I'm absolutely delighted. I think this is exactly what I've been pushing for 3-4 years now. So we finally got to the point where ARIA is properly funding a series of experiments which I think are critically important.
And the UK does seem to be sort of taking a lead on this issue. As far as I understand, no other government is sort of investing this much money in this many different technologies. I mean, have you had a role in that? Do you think this is partly sort of the influence of the organisations you've begun?
I think it's probably had an impact. Let's just recall we're in a very different situation today than we were in the year 2000, in the sense that all of these challenges are now with us. Before, we were talking about the theoretical predictions of these extreme weather events, and now they're happening. The reason I'm emphasizing the importance of these extreme weather events is because, frankly, if we got to net zero over the next 5 years, we've still got a tremendous challenge ahead of us because we're getting positive feedback effects from the loss of ice, particularly over the area around the North Sea, Greenland, etc., the North Pole. The loss of ice there during the polar summer is now threatening the whole planet. And the same is happening at Antarctica. We're reaching the point where it's not just an option that we look at these geoengineering, you're calling them, I always call them biomimicry experiments, that we need these in order to buy time to get ourselves down to removing fossil fuel dependence from the whole world. So we need much more time. And if we just sit back and say, it's fine, we can stop using fossil fuels over the next 30 years, that's not going to be good enough.
And so could you just talk me through one of the technologies I know you've been in favour of, which is marine cloud brightening? And then the other technology that gets lots of press and lots of interest is stratospheric aerosol injection. So could you sort of take us through both of those?
Right, so I think marine cloud brightening is a good potential technology. What we're doing there is using a biomimicry process. How are white clouds formed over the ocean? When there's a bit of a storm at sea, tiny droplets of seawater are created. Those tiny droplets in the hot sun, when the wind is blowing upwards from the blue sea that has been heating up under the effect of the sunshine, it carries these tiny droplets up 5,000, 6,000 feet more. And in that wind that takes them up, they lose their water, and you're left with a single crystal of ice from each droplet. That cloud of crystals now picks up water vapor from the atmosphere, and then you have a white cloud. If the crystals are small enough, if they're too big, you've got a black cloud. You want a white cloud that will reflect sunlight away while the sun is shining. So I think we know how it's done. We know what we need to do is create droplets of the right size. And the work going on here in the engineering department in Cambridge is all focused on how we can deliver water droplets with a very narrow size distribution and get that to function energetically in a feasible way. What we can't do is use too much energy in any of these projects. So we need to minimize energy production in all of them. So marine cloud brightening, I think, is a very promising technique. There are other means of reflecting sunlight away, and the favored is putting sulfates into the stratosphere. That is a controversial process. I'm actually saying to you, I don't think marine cloud brightening is at all controversial. But if we put sulfates into the stratosphere, there are two probable things that could happen. One is that we're looking at the whole planet and not just a regional area. And that whole planet operation means that we might, and there's probably a low chance of this, end the monsoons in India, and India depends critically for its food production on monsoons. That would be disastrous. So there are difficult unseen events, and it's difficult to carry out experiments that will eliminate these possibilities. But the operation with sulfates also has a problem. We've got rid of the CFCs, which were destroying the ozone layer and creating that ozone hole over the Antarctic. The Antarctic ozone hole is now closing up as a result of this good action. But if we put sulfates into the stratosphere, what will it do to the ozone layer? So we've got to look out for all of these unintended consequences or consequences that we can see as low likelihood, but even a low likelihood may happen. That's just a good illustration of why experiments are necessary. And I'm not ruling out experiments on sulfates. They must be done, and they've got to be done very carefully.
And the idea that we should do experiments, we should work out what would happen if we were to sort of deploy these types of techniques, that might seem relatively uncontroversial. It's not uncontroversial in the scientific community. So you've got some very distinguished climate scientists, Raymond Pierre Humbert and Michael Mann. Michael Mann, especially, I've known of him as a climate scientist, a very distinguished one for a very long time. They both wrote in The Guardian earlier in the year. That the UK's gamble on solo geoengineering is like using aspirin for cancer. And they say sort of even testing these ideas is dangerous because it sort of will encourage people to then deploy them. We don't have the governance to do that. And they say it's a dangerous distraction because it might encourage us to think that we can continue sort of producing carbon dioxide because ultimately one of these techno fixes will come along. I suppose, what's your response to people like this? And also, I suppose, a follow-up, why is it the case that really smart people who I think agree with you sort of on most of what you say, sort of fundamentally disagree with you on this issue? How should we make sense of that?
Yes, it's quite a difficult one. I would say what you've left out of their objections is a very important one, which is that if we're very successful at doing all these things, cooling the Earth by reflecting sunlight away from it, or capturing greenhouse gases at scale, billions of tons a year, we can go on using fossil fuels. So the first thing is this risk that the fossil fuel lobby will be empowered by this. And there is some truth in this. We have seen, for example, in the last 2 COP meetings, and both of those COP meetings were in oil-rich countries, we've seen that even the president of the COP was using this kind of statement that we'll carry on needing oil going well into the future, and we can capture all the greenhouse gases emerging. So there's the moral risk associated with being able to prove that we can do this. The real risk, and it's a very big ethical risk, is that we believe we can tackle everything by simply switching away from fossil fuels. And I do know that several of my critics in the past have over the last few months changed their minds. In other words, what we've seen in 2023 and 2024 has been a dramatic rise in global temperatures. We went up from 1.3 to 1.5. We're now at 1.65 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. And we have also seen an amazing increase in the heat of the surface of the oceans. The ocean surfaces have never increased as rapidly as they did in 2023. 2024, it's still high. It doesn't look like it's coming down. So what we have is all of the risks we've been worrying about, I've been worrying about for 7-8 years, are now coming to be. And I am saying to you, some of those scientists I know are changing their minds on this issue.
That was the first part of a longer interview with Sir David King. We went on to discuss more of the potential challenges facing geoengineering and his view on China's response to climate change. Really, really interesting. Someone with so much experience, actually, of being in the government and sort of at the top of the scientific field. As I say, though, many other very prominent and very distinguished scientists disagree. Very contentious topic, no denying that. That will be out tomorrow on the YouTube channel. Someone said in the comment, when will you interview someone who's against geoengineering? I have many people who are, but I will continue. I'm actually going to try and invite Michael Mann on, the person who wrote the article I put there to David King. So hopefully I can make that happen. Back in September, Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced that the UK would be suspending 30 of around 350 arms export licenses to Israel. In a speech to Parliament, he made it clear what kinds of weapons and weapons parts Israel would no longer be allowed to receive from Britain.
These include equipment that we assess is for use in the current conflict in Gaza, such as important components which go into military aircraft, including fighter aircraft, helicopters and drones, as well as items which facilitate ground targeting.
Now, at the time, the Labour government made various carve-outs. British weapons that Israel only used for defence, whatever that means, could still be exported, as could things like goggles and helmets. The British components for F-35 jets obtained by Israel through the global F-35 supply system would also still get through. That's because Lammy said that national security required the F-35 supply chain remain uninterrupted. But what he made very clear in that speech was that Britain could no longer supply weapons used by Israel in Gaza. To do that, he said, risked making the UK culpable in Israel's breaches of international law. Now, it wasn't a massive result, but it was still a result, except a new report suggests that Britain may have continued sending Israel offensive weapons and weapons parts anyway. Compiled by the Palestinian Youth Movement, Workers for a Free Palestine, and Progressive International, the report exposes the UK's previous as well as continuing arms sales to Israel. This is from the report. So it says, the data show that the UK has sent 8,630 separate munitions since the suspensions took effect, all in the category bombs, grenades, torpedoes, mines, missiles, and similar munitions of war and parts thereof other. It says evidence also shows the UK shipped 150,000 bullets to Israel in October 2023. So that's before the suspension came into effect. And the report's research is based on records held by the Israel Tax Authority, which records imports using customs codes. These numbers encode both the source of the import as well as the kind of goods delivered. Using those records, the researchers were able to uncover goods exported to Israel from the UK in three broad categories, so arms and ammunition, tanks, armoured fighting vehicles and parts, and aircraft, spacecraft and parts thereof. What the data shows is that David Lammy's so-called export ban may have had very little effect on the shipment of weapons and weapons parts from the UK to Israel. So this graph shows the number of shipments of aircraft and aircraft parts that took place between October 2023, when Israel's assault on Gaza began, and March this year. The red line marks the date of the export license ban. Now, as you can see, the largest shipment of the whole period took place 2 months after that export ban came into effect. The report is clear that it can't say for certain that these were military aircraft or components being shipped. They could have been for other kinds of planes. But the authors call the increase in shipments that took place at the time concerning, and they're demanding the government release full and transparent export data. The report has a little more evidence in the case of F-35 parts. So it was part of Lammy's pledge that it would be illegal to send F-35 components directly from the UK to Israel. Last year, Declassified reported that prior to September, Britain had sent 14 shipments of F-35 parts to the Israeli military from an RAF base in Norfolk. So again, that's before the export ban came into effect. Now, the report's researchers in this case, managed to identify those 14 shipments and discovered they all used a very particular export code. When they searched the post-ban Israeli imports, that code continued to come up. Their research showed that the UK has continued to send at least 13 further shipments under that code to Israel since September. Again, it's not conclusive, but it's certainly suggestive, with the report calling for a full investigation into the exports. And it's not just the report's authors who want the government to investigate. Former Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell said this: David Lammy needs to come to Parliament to respond to this report and explain how his and other ministers' statements to Parliament assuring MPs that arms sales to Israel had ended when this evidence demonstrates a huge scale of arms being supplied. Asked for a response to the report, a government spokesperson said this: this government has suspended relevant licenses for the IDF that might be used to commit or facilitate serious violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza. Of the remaining licenses for Israel, the vast majority are not for the Israeli Defense Forces, but are for civilian purposes or re-export, and therefore are not used in the war in Gaza. The only exemption is the F-35 program due to its strategic role in NATO and wider implications for international peace and security. Any suggestion that the UK is licensing other weapons for use by Israel in the war in Gaza is misleading. The UK totally exposes an expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. We urge all parties to return urgently to talks, implement the ceasefire agreement in full, secure the release of hostages taken by Hamas, and work towards a permanent peace. I'm joined now by Jeanine Hourani from Palestine Youth Movement, so one of the organisations behind this report. Thank you so much for joining me. Reading this report is somewhat frustrating, isn't it? Because the categories in this sort of tax information, they're so broad that, it seems like there could be various things going on here. And I suppose my question to you is, do you think that the research done here provides a smoking gun that the UK government breached its export ban?
Yeah, the smoking gun here is that the government is lying to us, So regardless of regardless of the limitations and the challenges around the research, it is undeniable that the government is lying to us. We saw footage just before of David Lammy and the kinds of things he's saying in government or to parliament. He pretends that, Starmer's government is only giving quote unquote helmets and goggles, and that the UK doesn't give what, in his words, they would describe routinely as arms. So he's basically categorically rejecting the fact that offensive weapons or that arms are being used or are being sent, from the UK to Israel. But what this report reveals actually is that the UK has sent thousands of military goods to Israel since October 2023. And this includes, as you mentioned, 150,000 bullets. And this includes also a further 9,000 munitions of war. And these items could include bombs, missiles. And these items are actually these categories that are broad. But even within the breadth of these categories, that single category is internationally defined as arms. So that entire category is internationally defined as arms. And so the UK is categorically sending arms from the UK to Israel. And of those 9,000 munitions that we kind of reveal in the report, over 8,000 of them, so the large majority, were sent after the suspensions of licenses in September 2024. So that's kind of the first lie that this kind of research report unravels, is that David Lammy is saying they're not sending arms, but that's not true. And the second lie is that government ministers have stated time and time again, not just Lammy, but Lammy has repeated it time and time again, that direct exports of F-35 parts from the UK to Israel have been banned since September 2024. And as you mentioned, they've admitted that they haven't stopped this global supply chain because it impacts the entire F-35 program, but they have provided reassurances time and time again that direct shipments of F-35 components from the UK to Israel have stopped. And that's something they have said categorically. But what this report actually reveals is that there is evidence to suggest that there are direct shipments of F-35 parts from the UK to Israel, and that these are ongoing as of 2 months ago. So there are multiple lies that this research exposes, even within the remit of kind of its limitations and the challenges around the opacity of the data.
Is there a way of getting, I suppose, data which is more explicit? Because I understand that this is got via sort of looking at sort of Israeli tax receipts. I suppose, do we have a right to know exactly what the UK government is exporting to different governments? Can there be a freedom of information request or something? Like, how would one acquire something even more explicit than this?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely do have, or we should have, the right to know what the UK government is sending. The government deliberately shrouds all of this in secrecy. It is so opaque, what the UK is sending. And we've had to be, as you kind of alluded to, really creative in our methodology in order to analyze this data. We've had to, find different ways of analyzing the data and of thinking about how we can kind of use this evidence in a way that tells us some sort of story. And the fact that actually that we can glean more from what the UK is sending to Israel from Israeli data than we can tell from what the UK is releasing is a huge issue. Why can we learn more about what this government is allowing to be sent to Israel through a foreign government rather than what our own government is sending? That is a huge transparency issue. That is a huge issue for us as kind of the public and as constituents. And that's why one of the key demands of the report that we're really pushing for is this demand around transparency, and is for disclosure of all UK shipments from the UK to Israel.
And I just want to get your thoughts on sort of the UK's role more generally. So in terms of words, they're sort of inching towards a tougher position than they used to have, especially now Israel has made it explicit that they want to occupy the whole of Gaza and kick people out. I mean, if you were a bit creative, you could work out that was always explicit, but it's being made even more explicit than it was. I want to show you a short clip of Minister for the Middle East, Hamish, or Amish, I'm not sure, Falconer, making this statement following Israel's government approving a plan to occupy the whole Gaza Strip.
Let me make the government position crystal clear. We strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's operations. Any attempt to annex land in Gaza would be unacceptable. Palestinian territory must not be reduced nor subjected to any demographic change. We want this war to end. We want an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, the urgent provision of humanitarian aid, and a pathway to a political solution.
Jeanine, do you welcome those tough words from the UK Labour government?
Well, I mean, if you ask me, it's too little too late. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of Palestinians need to be martyred for the Labour government to finally come through with empty words is what has now happened, especially in the face of a British public who we know undeniably stands with Gaza and stands with Palestine. You know, we have seen up to 1 million people take to the streets. We have seen students walk out of class. We've seen weapons factories shut down. We've seen a global wave of student encampments and occupations, and we've seen people shut down bridges and train stations. And now, 19 months into a genocide, this is what the Labour government has come up with is empty words. So it's really not enough, and it's really quite disgusting, but it's also expected. We always knew that the UK government and the weapons manufacturers here in Britain have blood on their hands, and this report really confirms that. It confirms that the UK government and weapons manufacturers partner to enable the massacre and genocide of our people in Gaza. And so what this evidence does is it really kind of confirms what we already knew, and it gives us the evidence base to be able to escalate, to hold the government accountable, and to create a crisis in the political establishment. Because we know, if 19 months since the genocide, that is all that this government can come up with, then we need to be taking matters into our own hands and enforcing a people's arms embargo.
Jeanine Hourani, thank you so much for joining me this evening, and congratulations on the research.
Thank you.
For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.